Ever feel like you're saying all the right things, but people just don't get it? The problem isn't what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. Amos McCoy breaks down how disc profiling, real listening, and body language can transform the way you connect. Leadership means more than talking. It includes making sure your message actually lands. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world. Are you ready to create real change in your leadership, your career, your life? Join me for a complimentary Lead and Thrive session, a 60-minute one-on-one strategy session where we will discuss your specific needs and map out the next steps to lead yourself and others powerfully. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Visit transformyourperformance.com/Lead Thrive session to book your Lead and Thrive session today. Let's work together to make it happen. Welcome to Rise to Lead podcast. I am delighted to sit down today with Amos McCoy from Maryland, currently Maryland, not originally, as far as I remember. So welcome to my podcast, Amos, and thanks again for having me on yours in the past, not too long ago, which is called McCoy Leadership Podcast for our listeners. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk with you this morning.
I am too. Really looking forward to this conversation. Allow me to briefly introduce you to our listeners who might not know you yet. Some of them might. Growing up in Leominster, Pennsylvania. Did I say that correctly?
Very close. Laymasters, just laymasters.
Laymasters. Okay, I should have asked you first. My first job his first job at Snyder's Elevator taught him grit and the power of relationships. Those early days also sparked his curiosity about leadership, watching how trust, respect, and effective communication could inspire people. His career path from humble beginnings to leading operations across the US was anything but linear. I could say the same of mine for sure. Along the way, he faced challenges like resistance to change and misaligned teams, yet those obstacles shaped his leadership philosophy, one built on influence, empathy, and helping others to reach their potential. Well, I think we have a lot of material here, and I do want to focus a lot on communication with you today because you're definitely the expert for that, and for some other topics, of course, as well. So,
Yes.
Great. So, my first question would be, Amos, what would you like to add to this bio, to what I just shared about you? So, I'm looking really for something that allows our listeners to know who Amos McCoy is and what shaped you the most, apart from even the Snyder's elevator work experience.
Absolutely. So it's funny when we talk about communication specifically. I have always said that you can connect with people much better by telling a story than what you can by sharing statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Where my story started as a very young man, my mother cleaned houses for a living. So in the summertime, I had the opportunity to go with her and go to work with her. So I got to see how my mother worked, which was great. But the other thing that I started to recognize, and I had this amazing opportunity, was throughout a week, some days she worked two places. I might get to see 7 or 8 different families in a week. And I started to notice that they all talked and communicated differently. So some were business owners, some were retired teachers, one in particular, this lady was a retired teacher that started teaching in 1890. So it gives you an idea, not only was it just different families, but different generations.
Yeah.
And as an example, this lady, her name was Mrs. Mosser. I knew as a young man that her belief was that children were to be seen and not heard. So I may play as much as I like as long as I made no noise. And on special occasions, it was okay to make noise, if she gave you a gift or something like that. And many people would get upset maybe with that, like, I can't talk. I don't like that person. And I decided to embrace it and try to, even as a very young man, start to understand why maybe some people have the ability to communicate and talk and people hear them, while other people are struggling just to be heard, period. Why is this happening? And so by seeing all of these different interactions that I had this amazing opportunity to see, I started to formulate in my own mind this idea, that everybody is a little bit different. Now, I've later learned that although all people are different, they're predictably different, right? Many times as you get to know somebody, you can kind of predict how they may react to certain things and some of those types of things. But then, kind of fast forwarding, one of my mother's clients that she cleaned for, he was an auctioneer, and he took a liking to me and took me under his wing, and I started going everywhere with him. Now, not only was he an auctioneer, but he was a local politician. He was on the school board. He was involved in the Lions Club and all these different things. And through those interactions with him, I really started to be able to try out how it was to talk to people and work with people. At 7 years old, I started working for him as an auction runner, and anybody that has been familiar with an auction, there's lots and lots of people there. There's people talking. You get to know people. There's regulars. There's new people coming, and it was such a great opportunity to learn how to connect with people on a personal level quickly. To start to identify what are they interested in. Do we have common interest in some of those kinds of things? I then started working at Snyder's Elevator and even honing those skills a little bit more. And one of the people that I got to meet at Snyder's Elevator was a gentleman by the name of Dick Winters. And some of you may say, that name sounds familiar. Dick Winters wrote the books that Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, the movies, were based on. And he was one of the very few that were in World War II from D-Day to the very end. And I knew him as a vitamin deliverer. He would deliver animal vitamins every 2 weeks. And that was really the extent that I knew him and the friendship that I built with him through those biweekly interactions. It wasn't until I was in my 20s, I was watching television and saw the Emmy Awards and saw that Dick Winters, this man that I knew, was on stage with Steven Spielberg, and that I made the connection as to this amazing life that he had lived. And my point is that what I was learning, and through later in life, I was able to create lasting relationships with people and connect with them without knowing all of the accolades of their career and everything that they've done, because at that young of an age, I was just willing to connect with somebody that I found interesting. I will add as a side note, I also later have become an auctioneer, and I've been an auctioneer for the past 20 years as well, which has been a lot of fun, and I get to interact with people.
Yeah, so I bought a lot of my pieces, my furniture pieces, in Argentina when I opened a bed and breakfast in Buenos Aires at an auction. And it was in a remote place. I cannot remember the barrio, the neighborhood, but it was a bit remote. I learned about this place through some local friends, and they took me there to buy these really beautiful pieces
for my bed and breakfast. So that's my experience with auctions. It was, of course, not a huge auction. It was a smaller place, but it was a pretty big store, and they sold a lot through auctioning the pieces off. Not everything, but yeah. So that's how far my experience with auctions goes. And then, of course, no, here there goes another one. I actually worked at deremate.com, and deremate is actually also a word for auction. So it used to be a startup that was similar to eBay, and it used to work in the Latin American market. That was actually the first time I lived in Argentina for a shorter period of time. I worked for them, and also worked for them a little bit in Brazil, a couple of months. There it's called arremate.com, but it was the same company. And I think later they were bought up by another company. Anyway, that's how far my auction. I just thought it was an interesting detail because I never get to talk about that.
Yes, that is very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's come back to you and your valuable experience. I'm really curious about what you have to say and share about communication. I have shared myself a lot about communication, and there's always, there are always different perspectives, and there's a lot of different wisdom and knowledge around it. So, in your experience, what is the most overlooked element of communication that could build stronger relationships in business or at work?
I think in today's age, the biggest thing that we overlook is the fact that communication and connection are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And although we do connect through communication, many times we get so busy in our lives that we have so many things going on that we just want to get the message out, and we don't think about who's receiving it, what their reaction might be, and how we want to deliver it. And one of the things that I find so fascinating is that studies have shown that 90% of what somebody receives as a message does not have to do with the words that they spoke. 90%. So only 10% has to do with the words. The other 90% is a mix of your body language, your tone. And what I love to point out is in today's age, we oftentimes communicate via text, email, WhatsApp, whatever the platform is, but we're not doing it in person. And if 90% of what we 90% of what we receive is not from the words, what's missing whenever you are texting rather than being in person? You're not there, right? You're not in person. So now the person has to think, what mood are they in? Why are they communicating this way? So the biggest thing is when you're ready to communicate and you want to make a connection, ask yourself, what am I communicating? What method should I use? And unless it is something that, needs to be documented for legal reasons or your business has a certain policy, I would encourage everybody to get up, walk down the hall, or go make an appointment and go talk to the person in person so they can see that you're passionate or that you're upset or that you're really happy. And the biggest example that I can share is that I went into a client one day, and as I was walking through the showroom, many of the members of the staff said, "Are you going to see the owner?" And I said, "I am." And they said, "Oh, she's in a really bad mood today." I said, "Really?" And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is very, abnormal. She's never in a bad mood. She's always upbeat. So I got to her office and I kind of, very cautiously asked, "How are things going today?" And she said, "Everything's great. I'm having a wonderful day and I've got a lot of things done." And about halfway through the conversation, she did share with me. She said, "I'm having a technical issue, though. The caps lock key is stuck on my keyboard and I can't get it to turn off." And it hit me that she had been sending emails in all caps all day. And everybody out there said, "Oh, she's really mad. She's being nasty." Well, she wasn't mad. She was having a technical problem. But because she wasn't in person delivering the message, they didn't get it. So I think
That
that
is
is
so funny. Yeah.
I think that's the biggest overlooked thing, is that there's a difference between communication and connection. And what we desire as humans is to connect with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So, not to take away from what you said about the 90%, but one thing, and one thing that I think is still, or I know is still transmitted apart from the words, is our energy.
Yeah.
So that is something we don't often talk about. It flows into the 90%. And again, it also flows into everything you write. So your intention is also really important because it's transmitted subconsciously. You might not notice it, and the other person might not be aware of it, but it is still transmitted and it can never be turned off. It just happens, right? So, yeah.
And on that note, an email or a text message is not a literary piece that you need to be super concerned about how you get to deliver the message. And so for me, I'm very straightforward. I'm a high D in disc. I'm very dominant, and I'm very bullet point type of person. And I know that. So when I'm really happy and I want to send an email, I will oftentimes utilize tools like AI and say, I am overly joyed with this message. Can you turn it into a message that shows my joy? And it does much better than what I can do. And so there are tools that we can use. And I've even been known sometimes to, start an email with, I am so overly happy with the result of this, and then list 5 bullet points so that they know I'm super excited, because they can't see me.
And you still transmit your message in a clear way, which is also really important, because when we go on and on and on and it's not structured, then it doesn't really help in most cases either, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, I can actually appreciate messages that are really bullet pointed and structured because it makes it faster and easier for me to get it, and to also realize what the purpose of the message is, right? But everybody's different again. So what you said earlier, it's also, we didn't directly talk about it, but it's also, of course, adjusting to our audience. Who is our audience? Who are we even talking to?
And I'll share a funny story. Over the years, when I've managed different places, I try to train everybody to understand how to communicate with different types of people. And that starts with me. Here's who I am and how I like to communicate. And I had a very tech savvy employee that just could not give up sending me, instead of an email, a chapter book. And because I was trying to get them to bullet point and get to that, get to the point a little bit faster, they actually started inserting a table of contents at the beginning of their email with hyperlinks that would take me to those places in the email. And it worked. But I've always found that to be kind of hilarious, that they were still wanting to make sure they put all that out there, but they gave me hyperlinks to take me to the point.
Yeah, like in a Kindle book, right? Or on a website. Okay. Yes, it is funny. So we talked about it a little bit already. We touched on it, right? But how do you have any other tips on how to connect with people through communication who communicate in a completely different way than you, and apart from what you've already shared now?
So the first step is understanding yourself and how you communicate and how you like to be communicated to. There are tons of personality trait profiles out there that can be done. I personally happen to be a a Maxwell method of disc consultant, and so I utilize disc. There are all kinds, and I'm not going to tell people that disc is the best in the world. Each one's a little bit different, but understanding the people that you're talking to and how you can maybe adjust your communication style so that you can come across to them. I actually also have, which I utilize, and I put it translated into disc. I have these 4 cards. They look like credit cards, and I carry them. And when I meet someone new, sometimes I will throw these cards out. And I just learned this about a month ago, through a podcast. I will throw these cards out and say, could you organize these in the order of your importance? What's most important to you? And this will help me to communicate with you better through our relationship. And it takes them 30 seconds. They put them into order, and now I can see what their personality traits are, or at least what's number one. And I can adjust. People, I said it earlier, people are different, but predictably different. And if we can understand that, we can start to adjust how we're going to communicate with them, and we have a better chance of connecting. The second piece is that when you really want to connect with somebody, regardless of their personality type, you can connect much better by being real, transparent, and using stories. Statistics are great for making decisions. Statistics are not going to help you connect with someone. And there's more to it, but the third piece that I think is so important is learning how to listen. I know sometimes it's hard because we're thinking about what we want to say next, and we're kind of raising our hand almost saying, no, no, me. I want to tell you something. We just need to be quiet, listen. And the most important part about listening is repeating back or acting upon what you have heard. You can listen to all of your employees and hear everything they say, but if you do nothing, you're not going to have the credibility to be able to connect with them. And I guess I will add a fourth part, which I said earlier as well. People often don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And you can show that care through listening and acting upon what you have heard and the feedback that you've received.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that a few times before too, and I couldn't agree more. Yes, and about the listening, it's not just to listen with your ears, it's to listen with your heart, it's to listen with your entire body. I really like that image of listening with your body, right?
Yes.
Of course, again, people cannot always see you as you listen to them. You might be on the phone. However, they will also notice, they will even notice a smile. And
Yes.
again, it's that energy, that intention, but it's also the body language itself that is transmitted to a maybe tinier extent, but to a certain extent, right?
Absolutely. If we would have started this interview with me sitting with my arms crossed and a terrible look on my face, leaning back in my chair, you would have probably got the feeling right away that I don't think he wants to be here. And that's going to change as well how you interact with me, right?
Absolutely. And maybe people would have heard it even if they listen on audio.
Yes.
Right? So, yeah, and I would have asked you to reschedule. Okay. Well, you know, I personally love in-person interactions, but of course, that's not always possible. So we play with what we have in each situation, right? Yeah. And what is, in your opinion, what is one misconception or misperception maybe people have about communication that actually hurts connection?
Um, I think two things.
Okay.
One, when people are only interested in getting a message out and don't care about what the result is. So this might be, a big Fortune 500 company that has a change to make, and they send out a memo saying, we've now made this change. And you might say, well, how are they going to connect with the 1,000 employees they have?
Mhm.
And it's a great example. And I've actually seen this unfold one time where a large company made a change to their purchasing agreements. And they decided that by picking certain suppliers and working a deal with them, that they could save a tremendous amount of money across the entire United States. And basically, on a Friday afternoon, they sent a memo out and said, going forward, we have a new list of suppliers that everybody's required to use. And at a local level, this particular company had like 265 locations across the United States, and each one of those locations had relationships with their local suppliers. So locally, at that local level, they started to question and kind of say, I'm not going to do that. I have a relationship. I can save money here locally. And when I got involved and they said, we're having all this pushback, I said, well, how did you communicate? And they said, we sent a memo. And I kind of thought to myself, it's the infamous, Friday afternoon memo that
Yeah.
probably half of the people didn't read. And secondly, there's not really a reason. It was just, we have done this, you must do this. And I said, have you thought about reaching out to each one of those 265 plants and explaining the amount of money that we're going to save as a company as a whole, and getting them to buy in that, yes, it might be slightly more expensive for this one item for you, but it's going to be cheaper for 175 other locations if we give all of our business to this supplier. So they did that, and lo and behold, there was buy-in. There was a connection now with the message. They understood what they were doing. And the other biggest thing is, so many times we get caught up in being us that we forget. And I'm pulling from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, but it's
Mm.
the paradigm shift. And he tells a great story. I believe you can even find the video on YouTube where he's sitting in a subway. Some children get on the subway with their father. The children are running around. They're bumping into people, and they're just being obnoxious.
I remember that.
Yep. And finally, Stephen Covey leans forward and says to the father, do you think you could control your children? They're being quite obnoxious. And the father looks at him and says, well, I probably should. But the thing is, we just left the hospital and their mother died an hour ago, and they don't know how to handle it. And quite frankly, I don't know how to handle it. And Stephen Covey tells that he had a paradigm shift. He went from being mad to being compassionate almost immediately. And what I'm getting at is, in communication and connecting with others, sometimes what doesn't seem important to us at that moment in time may be very important to them. And we don't know what's happening in their lives unless we take the time to ask, understand, and see where they're at. And if we want to make a true lasting connection and communicate well with someone, sometimes we have to have a paradigm shift and understand where are they coming from.
Absolutely. So in the first example, it was basically adding the why, the reason, and
Yes,
explaining the situation. The email might still have been pretty transactional, but it added that element, right? And then in the Covey story, and I actually have the book in French here lying on my table. I'm reading it again in a different language now after quite some time. So it's about not judging too quickly, and sometimes we might not be able to even find out what the reason is, and maybe then just really take a step back and say, I really don't know all the context. I might not be able to find out about it. It could be anything.
absolutely. And I guess I'm just thinking, an additional piece of that is being able to deliver on vision. Excuse me. And being able to show people and get them to understand in a way that they can see it. And again, it's through stories, interactions, working with someone. And it might take 2 or 3 times before they see the vision, but getting them to see that vision, beginning with the end in mind, not to continue with thinking about the 7 habits. But again, back to what I said earlier, why are we communicating? What are we trying to get across, and being able to deliver that vision?
Yes, absolutely. Which brings us back to clear communication, which we talked about a little bit in your written emails, with regards to your written emails in the beginning, right?
Yes.
And so how then would you say we can balance speaking our personal truth with maintaining compassion in, let's say, more challenging conversations?
Again, through storytelling and being
Mhm.
real with people. Many times, what I personally will do, is I will think about a message that I need to deliver, and maybe this might be in a tough situation. Just recently, I helped an organization find a new executive. And through that process, and many of them listen, so if they might hear this someday. And at any rate, through that process, there were 4 internal candidates. One of the internal candidates received the position, 3 did not. So I had to sit down, one, and deliver the message that you did not get it to 3 of them. And so I thought about, how do I want to deliver that? I could have very easily sent an email and said, you were not chosen. Candidate X was chosen. Thank you for your participation. I think that would have left them feeling pretty cold and wondering what happened.
Yeah, the easy way out for you.
Yes. So I thought about, what message am I delivering? How are they going to receive it? And how might I package that into, a story along with that, and an offer and an invitation to talk. And so I did it with each one of them differently. And I called them on the phone. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in person because I was traveling, but I did not want to delay. So I called them on the phone, and we had a phone conversation, and I was very straightforward and told them that they were not chosen. I told them they did a great job throughout the interview process. I kind of shared a part of my life journey with them and encouraged them to look at this as an opportunity to continue to grow, and then offered to take time to sit down with them and to go through some areas of improvement and help them come up with an improvement plan. For the most part, it went over very well. But just understanding, what are you delivering? You never want to convolute the message that you're delivering. You need to be clear, but then packaging that with some life examples that might be helpful for that person or might give them some comfort depending on what the situation is. The other big situation that folks come to me with is oftentimes in a team setting. They'll say, we have a new initiative and we've lost steam and the team is not buying into every piece that we need to do along the way. And again, when we're communicating those pieces of that plan or that strategic item or that goal that has to be done, we have to keep them very clear on what the end picture is. They have to have that vision and know what they're going towards. But we also need to make sure that we, in order to connect, we are sharing real life examples, the things that are happening, how this gets applied, what the problems are going to be, and kind of working through that process with them. It is not and should not be, it is not the 1950s. We should not be delivering a message and saying, go figure it out, and walking away. We need to work with them and try to grow them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in your opinion, what role does vulnerability play in creating authentic connections? Let's say we want to build a longer term connection through a communication, for example, with a new colleague or whoever that might be.
I think vulnerability is a huge piece of it. We need to be able to share. For instance, let's say we made a bad decision. And to be able to come back and share, I've made this bad decision. I need you as the team or you as my colleague. I need your help to correct this. And here's what I've learned from the bad decision that I have made. We're all real. We're people. We are going to make mistakes. Sometimes it could be around bad communication. I many times have had to come back and acknowledge to someone that, that was a little bit misleading. That email that I sent out, I should have called you instead of sending an email, or I should have come to visit you rather than doing this. In today's world, with the young folks, I understand that some of them, break up with their boyfriends and girlfriends via text message. That's not being real vulnerable. But going and sitting down and saying, this isn't working and here's why it's not working for me. I think we should, do something different. That's a real conversation. So more than anything, I guess what it comes back to is you need to be vulnerable in those conversations and willing to have real conversations with people.
Yeah. And then it also serves you, actually, right?
Yes,
Even if it's a breakup, it serves you to walk away with some value even from that situation, from that conversation. You might get new insights if you send a text
absolutely.
message and the person might not even respond. Then you stay in the dark about certain things that you could have learned, right? About yourself even.
Yes.
So
And even letting an employee go. That's a question that often comes up. I've tried to coach this person. They're not coming along. It is now progressed to the point that we need to let them go.
mhm.
And you as a manager and a leader can learn a tremendous amount because and ultimately maybe you do need to let them go, but maybe they have some feedback during that period that you say, you know what, I think I could have done a few things differently here. And we're all learning as we go. And the best thing about being a leader is that everybody was a terrible leader when they first got started. You don't start out being perfect. You can improve.
I certainly had to let some people go while I was still in a leadership role at a company that was not mine, right?
Yes.
So, yes, absolutely. And, I remember clearly that I was working with somebody whose assistant, he wasn't really always at the level he wanted her to be, but he was so afraid of having that conversation that he never wanted to take that step. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do it for you. You are the one who works with that person every day. And yeah, some people then they put it off because they do not want to have this conversation. And of course, yes, there is a relationship that had been, there was that relationship on a personal level that had been growing over the years that was actually good. It was just certain things that just really weren't ideal, right? And I've seen that a few times, by the way, with different people. Um,
It,
yeah,
I
and then
think
it's
that
dragging along, and it's never really resolved.
yes, and I think that's a disservice not only to that individual, but
Yeah.
to yourself, your organization. How can you expect someone to get better if you can't be candid with them and say, and I was at a soccer game for my daughter a couple years ago, excuse me, soccer practice, and I
Mhm.
watched the coach do something, and I actually wrote it down because I thought this is remarkable. The coach took this young student that had first time playing soccer and said it was obvious that the student did not understand what they were supposed to be doing. And the coach went over, got down on their level, and said, look, this is what I ask you to do. What is your understanding of that? And the young student kind of gave, tried to give what they felt they were supposed to be doing. And it was obviously not what the coach had asked. And the coach, rather than yelling or screaming or getting upset, said, look, let me show you what I need. So he's saying, this is where you're at. This is where I need you to be. Can you help me understand how I can get you from here to here? And it worked.
Yeah.
And that student listened. And I realized that at that moment that so many times that's what we're missing with people is we never tell them, you're here today and I need you to be here. Do you understand you're not where I would like you to be? And can you help me get you there? And making sure they understand that if we ignore it or we do nothing, it's only going to get worse.
And this is also part of making sure that our message lands with our audience, whoever that audience is.
Yes.
Sometimes it's about allowing them to reframe, to explain it to us, and so that we can then make, a new attempt when necessary, or just, yeah, do it in a completely different way. I always am for uh, allowing people to share their own solutions first before a decision is taken, whenever that is possible, right?
Yes. I
Yeah.
think it just hit me. I believe it was Spencer Johnson, 1 Minute Manager, or one of his books. He said that the receiver of any message believes that message to be true until something changes their perception.
Mhm.
And sometimes we also have to realize as leaders that even if somebody repeated what we ask them to do and they seem to have understanding and buy-in, they're going to go out and they're going to be with their peers and other people in the organization or other people in life. And sometimes those other people can change their perception and say, no, 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 think, I don't think Regina meant that. I think what she actually meant was this because I talked to her yesterday and she had kind of said this. So I think you misunderstood. And then the person reasons through it, and all of a sudden you end up with something different. So also it's important that you revisit with folks
Mhm.
what the goal is, what is supposed to be happening, so they continually have reinforcement of what the end product is or what the vision is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to get back. I just had this thought as you were talking, listening to what you were saying, also about different people, giving different, not just perspectives, but interpretations, really, of what was said. In a different way, this also applies to, there are people who are more malleable in terms of they are more like reflectors of other people. And there is actually, there, just like there's disc, there's also human design, and there are certain types, and one is actually called the projector and whatnot. So anyway, but they are possibly more likely to switch their opinions around depending on who they talk to. So, whoever will make the strongest connection might, and I'm not talking about a specific profile now of the human design, this is just an example, right? There are all sorts of different profiles of people, and without judging anybody, but there are, people who definitely change their opinion about the same topic more easily than other people. And it depends on who they talk to and who makes the strongest connection sometimes. Right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I also believe as a leader, we should. So if we have a goal that involves 10 people within our business, we need to solicit that feedback and gain buy-in from all 10 people that are going to be affected. Sometimes I have seen leaders almost default to putting 5 of those 10 in a room because they know those 5 they can probably persuade and kind of get them on their side, and then bring the other 5 in and have all 10 there, and now it's 6 against 5, and they progress that way. And it's not in a mean way or a manipulative way. That's just how they have learned to, in their idea. And again, this is managing people, not leading people.
Mhm.
And so you want to be very careful that when you recognize that there are some people that are maybe have that ability to kind of switch to whoever they have the biggest connection with, you want to solicit from everybody because there's a great opportunity there that many times you may come up with a better solution than what yours at that moment is. Many times I start a meeting with an idea in my head of what, a goal or something that's going to happen. And by the time the meeting's over, I have a completely different idea because I've now got relative information from the 10 people that are going to be involved in that process.
Yeah, it's the principle of co-creation,
Yes,
to build or create something bigger together than we could potentially or possibly build on our own, right?
absolutely.
It's
Yes.
totally that. Yeah. Well, is there anything you would like to add? This has been very insightful so far. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you would like to touch on before we close today?
I think really just one small piece as I'm thinking about it. The other thing that I coach folks on and talk about a lot when we talk about communication is, um, and this might be more so towards a selling relationship,
Mhm.
as well as just a leadership relationship, but it's the gap model. And knowing that everybody you talk to, they're at a certain place in their life, and they probably have personal and professional goals to go somewhere else. And there's a gap in between there. And as a leader, to make that connection sometime, or to aid in that connection, helping folks fill that gap and get from one point to another, can be very valuable, and very valuable for the organization, and not only the growth. And it recently came up. I don't remember who said it, but we were talking about delegation, and the person said that delegation is really a tool, and that you should be delegating to grow people, not delegating just to get it off of your plate. And it's kind of that same principle, that sometimes we can help folks grow. And when they see that we're investing in them and that we're helping them to grow, that will only grow the connection that we have with them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what you just said about delegation. I've actually written about that too, a few articles, also on my LinkedIn newsletter. So you might find that particular article also interesting. So I invite you to check that out. Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for joining us today. This has been very insightful, and thanks for sharing a few pieces of your leadership and communication wisdom with us, as much as we could fit into those minutes that we have had together. So I'm very grateful for this conversation, and I'm sure it is valuable for our listeners. So again, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thanks to everyone listening. If you got value from this episode, share it with your friends, with your colleagues, your family members, your business partners, anyone you think might get benefit from it. And also any other episodes, of course, of this podcast, of the Rise to Lead podcast. Until next Thursday, when a new episode goes live again.
Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you like this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, remember to rise to lead.